Good evening and welcome back to CNN Money Switzerland. I'm Maria Montero with your latest headlines this Tuesday. Companies in Switzerland say they are faring even worse now than they did during the 2009 financial crisis. What's more, they expect the situation to deteriorate further in the coming months. Now, that's according to the latest Cough Business Situation Indicator, which fell sharply in April. The COVID-19 pandemic is hitting all sectors hard. However, the lockdown has been especially bad for the retail and hospitality industries, where businesses do not expect any improvement in the near future. The indicator, which surveys more than 4,500 firms, found that companies are more worried about the slump in demand than disruption in their own operations. Now, that comes as figures from the Swiss Economic Office released today show consumer sentiment dropping to its lowest level since the early 1990s. The concern is largely centered on the labor market, with the index on expected unemployment making its biggest quarterly jump since 2007. And during this time of economic uncertainty, many are also holding onto their purse strings and putting off large purchases. And as the second day of Parliament's extraordinary session got underway, rent reductions for small businesses and financial support for the media were among the items on the agenda, as were some of the finer print details around the terms of the loans to companies hit by the pandemic. Both houses also signed off on a 1.9 billion Swiss franc aid package for the aviation sector. And Germany's top court has ruled that the country's central bank must stop buying any more government bonds under the ECB's long-running quantitative easing scheme within the next 3 months. That is, unless the ECB can prove the purchases by the Bundesbank are necessary. The decision comes despite the EU's top court ruling in 2018 that the program was in line with EU law. The ruling does not apply to the 750 billion euro bond buying scheme launched last month to fight the pandemic. And fresh off their recent emergency approval from the FDA for their new antibody tests, pharma giant Roche CEO Schwan says they are fielding calls from customers and governments across the globe. And while Schwan considers antibody testing to be a very important step towards fighting the virus, it's not the final solution. How much does each test cost?
The cost of our test is really very low. The vast majority of the cost is related to logistics and personnel in the lab.
Okay, so can you give me like a ballpark figure?
We don't communicate the price of our test, but the price is no hurdle to access whatsoever. Really, the vast majority of the cost is personnel cost in the lab, infrastructure in the lab, logistics, because you have to draw blood, you have to send the sample to the lab. And I should also say, unlike molecular tests, antibody tests can be produced at low cost and can be scaled up very quickly. So that's also the reason why these kind of tests are much cheaper than molecular PCR tests.
That was why I was so curious about that, because I have spoken to other companies that are developing antibody tests, and some of them come in at $30 a piece, and you can actually do them at home.
Right. I mean, home test kits you can only do with pricking your finger and take blood, arterial blood. For this test, actually, you have to draw blood from the vein, and the accuracy, the reliability of these tests which you send to the labs is much better than these rapid home tests.
Right. So how interesting is this for your company? I mean, obviously the share price went up on the news, but what about those numbers? What can we expect?
Well, if you look at the overall diagnostics business, what we see is that many patients, people are not going to the hospital or to the doctor because they are so afraid of being infected by the coronavirus. And as a result of that, what happens is that the routine diagnostics business is negatively impacted. Now, with the coronavirus testing, we can partly compensate for that effect. But on a group level, actually, this is not material.
If we go back then to the lower margins, I mean, as we said, it's always been sort of a question with investors. Will this change now? Are margins going to be better perhaps with the new COVID tests?
No, I don't expect such an impact. I mean, the margins which we have for this COVID test are comparable to the margins we have for our other tests in our portfolio.
And talk to me about your strategy then at Roche. How have the strategic options, have they changed after the pandemic?
Our overall strategy is not changed. I mean, we focus on pharma and diagnostics. We increasingly focus on the digital opportunities in healthcare. And we bring this all together to drive what we call personalized healthcare. That will remain our strategy for the future. And let's don't forget that, yes, it's now very important to fight this pandemic and to do everything to get this under control. But at the same time, there are many, many other diseases where patients are in serious need, and we have to make a contribution for those patients as well.
And do we see a different Roche, a different pharma industry post-corona?
I mean, there are certainly interesting learnings from this experience. I mean, one thing I was really surprised is the level of collaboration within the industry, but equally important, the collaboration with governments and regulators. I mean, it is amazing how well and how fast the approval of new medical devices or medicines is happening these days. It shows us what is possible if we really closely work together.
We've had some chief economists say that it's going to take decades for the economy to recover. Is the idea of these antibody tests, these immunity tests, can they be a lifeline? Can they somehow help save the economy?
I think the antibody tests are really, really important to manage this crisis. First of all, it allows you to track the pandemic. You see how many people have been infected. You see how many people get newly infected. And that is extremely important in terms of the public measures which are taken and how quickly you normalize the life in a society. But also from a personal point of view, it's very likely that if you have gone through an infection that you're also immune. So that also makes a big difference for your personal decisions. So yes, indeed, broad testing for antibodies, I think will be very important to get our hands around this pandemic.
It's not just balance sheets being impacted by coronavirus, but also the sporting field. Our sports correspondent, Matt Layton, takes a look at what's ahead for women's football in Switzerland post-crisis.
Tatjana, how much has the women's game been suffering since the COVID-19 lockdown?
Obviously, like everybody else in football, we had to stop playing in terms of matches and training sessions. That was early mid-March. And since then, the players have not been back on a pitch during all those weeks. They got training sessions from their coaches to train at home, but of course that's mostly in the physical area and not so much on the pitch. And they don't want to become athletes and marathon runners. They want to be football players. So yeah, in this respect, we've been touched like everybody else, and we're just not playing football at all for the moment.
In Switzerland, I'm a little bit confused with the women's game. Is it professional or not? This seems to be a bit of misunderstandings.
Yes, that's correct. We had quite some discussions about that because the men's top two leagues have the green light to go on with training sessions, and if they want so, they're still discussing about that. And the women's game has been cancelled like every other league in Switzerland, and it has created some discussions because it was considered to be not a professional league. And I think we need to be more specific on that. It was not done lightly. We have had discussions with the clubs as well and with the association and the different groups. And you need to be just, I think, really clear on what you're discussing about. To continue to play football is a risk. And we all know the situation for society, for people, and all the difficult issues we're having. So you don't just say we want to go back on the pitch and play football. It has questions about the economy, about the value of football, and clearly on the men's professional side there are media rights, there are TV rights, there are contractual rights. Yeah. Whereas in women's football, in this case, maybe a bit luckily, there are less contracts with partners, and we have no obligation towards media to play the matches. So we could take our decision if we want to play or not, purely on reality facts and on pragmatic facts. And we decided together with the clubs that it does not make sense to continue to league in this season. We rather stop it now. We give the players a good break in summer. We prepare the new season as it was planned, with a decent and a normal preparation time, and go into new season in the way we would have done it before.
You are a major personality in this game, from player to manager to many years with FIFA. Has the momentum been lost a little bit? Because women's football was really starting to charge, but we haven't really seen it on the press recently.
Well, that's true. It's a reflection of the reality for women's football. There were some negative decisions, like the Euro 2021 has been proposed to 2022, which might be the right decision, but still you can see that women's football suffers from certain decisions on men's football. Generally speaking, I don't think the coronavirus has really hit women's football badly for the moment, but we will see if there are any consequences in the near future. I personally hope for the contrary. I hope that people see the value of women's football now in all these discussions about being more realistic, being more down to earth, being more, true to your values. These are all things women's football can totally rely to. And I hope the new structure in football will reflect more women's football and the sport played by women.
Do you think there are going to be any casualties in the women's game once we come out of this coronavirus?
I really don't hope so. In England, there was one club who closed their women's section already due to the coronavirus. That's the only club I've heard so far, and I found it honestly really shocking that this happens nowadays. And maybe there will be others to follow, but not on the bigger scale. I really think you can't do that anymore, and you shouldn't. Football is for all, and that's what we all should drive for. If it's a FIFA, a confederation, a national association, or any club, there should be equal treatment, and women's football has a big part in the football world by now, and this should be reflected in the structures, in the decision-making positions, and that's what we need to change maybe in the near future, so that women's football becomes a bigger part of the football bodies, structures, and decision-making bodies.
Switzerland is gearing up for the launch of its contact tracing app starting mid-May. My colleague Tanja König gets the inside scoop on what to expect.
Contact tracing apps are like millions of mini detectives tracking our interactions and alerting us to potential danger. But they don't come without controversy.
Basically, you send anonymized tokens at each visit you have with some other person running the app as well. If some person is tested positive and then gives this to the app and says the app, okay, I'm positive, then at this point, the others have to get notified. And this happens with our approach in a decentralized way. That means that everyone having all the contacts stored locally on their phone.
UBIC is developing Switzerland's app along with ETH and EPFL. Their decentralized strategy is also the approach suggested by Apple and Google. It means that no third party, including the state, can access the data of the user. And it's what sets Switzerland apart from other European countries that are considering a centralized approach.
The principle of proportionality calls for the employment of the mildest means available to achieve kind of what is desired, the desired end. And it is obviously much less problematic if the information stays on the phone of the user compared to if it goes to a central server of a third party.
The app relies on voluntary participation, and experts say that ideally at least 60% of the population should use it. But Matthias Wellig says that even with fewer people signed up, it still does its job.
And of course, it's good. The more people we have, the better the system gets. But in the end, it's about reducing infections, and also with less users, we reduce infections, and this is basically what we want to do.
The National Advisory Commission of Biomedical Ethics recommends that the app is part of a broader strategy for pandemic control and should just be used for a limited period of time until the emergency is over. Tanja König, CNN Money, Switzerland.
Greece has been able to avoid the brunt of the COVID-19 pandemic with early closures and strict restrictions. CNN's Nick Robertson has the story.
Welcome to Greece, the new normal, at Athens International Airport.
Wow, thank you.
Thorough COVID-19 testing. We're negative. Everyone off our flight is getting it. It's tough love, but Greece is defying expectations. Despite an aging population and creaking healthcare, it is holding off COVID-19. And it's no easier if you live here. Until this weekend, just to leave home, you had to register with the government, text the number 1 through 6, go to the pharmacy, buying groceries, exercise, all part of a hard, fast lockdown. Greece's new post-populist but pragmatic prime minister says is working.
So we feel we have reached that point where we have almost completely suppressed the epidemic, at least its first stage, and we will gradually begin to relax.
Do you feel like you've dodged the bullet?
We feel we've dodged the first bullet, very clearly.
Putting on, mask, putting on this protective gear because we're going to go into the ICU. So how are these patients doing? Dr. Anastasia Kotanidou leads the way.
Better now.
Better, good?
Yeah.
Life for some still in the balance. But ICU here at 1/5 capacity, thanks, she says, to the early lockdown.
And this helped you in the hospitals?
Yeah.
150 deaths, around 2,600 confirmed infections, less than New York some days. And not a single doctor or nurse in this Athens' main COVID-19 hospital infected.
We don't have any infection from health staff or doctor, no.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
There seems to be, dare I say, a very strong message for the United States and the United Kingdom, whose track records at the moment on this pandemic are probably some of the worst in terms of death and infection rates.
I think we've done it the right way. Of course, we didn't get everything completely right, but if you look at the numbers, you can't argue with what we have achieved.
Mitsotakis' challenge now, restarting the economy. Selected stores reopened Monday. Another new normal. Hair salon owner Konstantinos Sklavanitis greets customers with a temperature check and hand sanitizer. Reopening after 7 weeks, 1/3 capacity, but longer hours.
Economically, we're definitely taking a hit. Hopefully within 2 months, we can go back to norm, but norm will not be what it was.
It could be a long journey. Tourism, 20% of the country's economy, tentatively targeted to begin July. And that's where things could get tough. Imagine these beaches teeming with tourists again, friend and potential enemy, invisibly intertwined, a blade that cuts both ways, economic salvation or a second wave of COVID-19 suffering.
Ideally, we want to have more high-end tourists where we can actually respect social distancing. We have,
but it's a risk.
It's a very tough trade-off. I'll be very honest with you, Nick. Nobody knows exactly how to do this.
And remember our COVID-19 test at the airport? Well, the key to tourism success, the Prime Minister says, is a new international standard where visitors are tested at home before they arrive. Nick Robertson, CNN, Athens, Greece.
And don't forget, you can catch all of our content, as always, on cnnmoney.ch. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow.